Have you ever wondered how a superpower, a civilization that seems absolutely permanent, actually ends? It's usually not with some big bang. It's often with a whisper, a slow, quiet unwinding that, the people living through it barely even notice. Today, we're going to explore why the greatest threat to an empire isn't an enemy army, but its own quiet loss of belief. This right here, this is the core idea we're going to unpack. That illusion of permanence? That's the real Achilles heel. See, when a nation gets convinced that it's special, that it's the exception to all the rules of history, that's when it stops paying attention to the cracks forming right under its feet.
All right, so let's just picture ancient Rome for a second. I mean, at its absolute peak, the roads were perfect, the army was unstoppable, the currency was solid. It just didn't look like something that could ever die. It felt eternal. And that feeling, that sense of we've made it, that's what created this massive blind spot.
We always think of the fall of Rome like it was this big, dramatic movie scene, right? But it wasn't like that at all. It was a process, a really, really slow one. For your average Roman on the street, life just kind of went on. They woke up, they went to work, and they told themselves the same things we do. Hey, relax, it'll be fine. They never saw the end coming because it was happening in slow motion. And this is where we get to the core comparison for today's explainer. So just swap out the marble columns for today's glass skyscrapers, switch the legions for drones and aircraft carriers, and trade the old silver coins for the US dollar. The skin is different, right? The tech has changed, but the bones, the fundamental structure of the empire, it looks hauntingly familiar. Okay, so every empire is built on something, but it's not what you think. It's not stone or steel. It's really a social contract. This kind of unspoken promise between the government and its people. And the very first sign of real trouble, that's when that contract starts to quietly fall apart. Look, Rome's true strength wasn't its legions. It was trust. People had to believe the laws were basically fair, that the military was actually protecting them, and that the whole system, well, that it made sense. As long as that trust held, Rome could survive pretty much anything. Wars, plagues, even a few terrible leaders. But the second that trust started to wobble, everything else became incredibly fragile. And here's the thing, this erosion of trust, it wasn't some big, loud event. It was quiet. It looked like this. Taxes just kind of creeping up year after year. Your paycheck, it just doesn't go as far as it used to. And you start to feel this huge distance growing between the people in charge and, well, everyone else. The system still works on paper, but for more and more people, it just doesn't. Let's talk about inflation for a second. Back in Rome, the government started watering down the silver in its coins to pay its bills, so the coin looked the same, but it was worth less. Now, that's not just some boring economic policy. It's a lie. It's the system itself lying to you about what something is worth. It's a total breach of confidence. And this is where it hits home for everybody. You can have experts on TV arguing about percentages all day long, but your grocery bill? It doesn't argue. Your rent notice? It doesn't negotiate. People feel this stuff in their gut long before the official story ever admits there's a problem. So what happens when you have this giant gap between the official story and your own lived reality? Where does all that trust go? I mean, it doesn't just evaporate into thin air. It has to go somewhere. It turns into cynicism. It turns into just looking out for number one. And that shift, that's the next big phase. When people stop believing in the long-term future of the system, they completely change how they act. You stop thinking like a citizen, building for the future, and you start thinking like a survivor, just trying to make it through the week. And you can see this shift happening in a few really specific ways. Saving for the long haul, it starts to feel stupid. So people start speculating, gambling on risky stuff, investing in a real business, that feels way too slow. So everyone's got a side hustle now. And building something that lasts? No way. It's all about grabbing what you can right now. The whole time horizon just shrinks from decades to days. And let's be really clear here. All this frenzy, the crypto trading, the house flipping, the constant hustle, on the surface, it can look like a really strong dynamic economy. But the argument here is that it's something totally different. It's panic wearing a hoodie. It's a society that's gone on the offensive. Because just playing defense, just saving your money, that doesn't feel safe anymore. Now we come to what might be the single most dangerous question in the history of any empire. It's the question that pops into a soldier's head when they're stationed thousands of miles from home, thinking about the country they're supposedly fighting for. It's that moment conviction starts to waver.
See, an army's true strength isn't its hardware. It's not the jets or the tanks. It's morale. It's that deep, shared conviction that you're protecting something that actually matters. And when that conviction starts to crack, when soldiers come home to a place that feels broken or divided or just plain indifferent, suddenly all that expensive hardware doesn't mean a thing. Rome still had its legions, but it lost its conviction. So what happens at the top when the foundations start to crumble? Do they push for big, bold reforms? Nope, not usually. The most common response is just denial. And when that's not enough, they switch to distraction. It basically becomes state policy. These were the kinds of things you'd hear in late-stage Rome. And yeah, they probably sound a little familiar, don't they? It's the official language of everything's fine, meant to calm everyone down, and maybe, just maybe, to convince the leaders themselves that they don't have to change a thing. And when the talking points weren't cutting it anymore, Rome gave the people a show. You had the Colosseum, the chariot races, just non-stop drama. And the goal was super simple. Keep people entertained, and more importantly, keep them fighting with each other so they wouldn't look up and see who was really causing the problems. Fast forward to today, and you see the exact same pattern. When that core promise that you can work hard and get ahead starts to fade, the system gives you other things to get obsessed with. Politics turns into a reality TV show. The media just becomes a constant blast of noise. And culture, that becomes the main battlefield where we fight about everything. And it all circles back to this one simple test. Next time you're talking to someone, ask them, hey, do you trust the system? But don't just listen to what they say. Watch their face. 50 years ago, that answer would have been a pretty quick yes. But today, there's a pause. There's a hesitation. And right there, in that little gap before they answer, you can literally measure the decay of trust. All right, so this brings us to the end game. This is the final exam that history gives every single great power. And it's a test that boils down to one choice. Do you focus on projecting power, or do you focus on rebuilding trust? Now, the source material mentions a specific year, 2026. But we have to be super clear about this. This is not some doomsday prophecy. It's presented as a pressure point. A moment in time where a bunch of these long-term trends, we're talking debt cycles, global confidence, they might all converge at once. So the question isn't, does the world end? The real question is this the moment when the stress on the system finally becomes greater than the people's belief in the system? And that really brings us to the core argument of this whole thing. Empires don't really get assassinated by an outside force. It's not the barbarian invasion you see in movies. It's an internal process, a quiet withdrawal. It's when people, millions of them, just decide to opt out. They stop participating. They start working around the system because they just don't believe in it anymore. So let's end with this final thought. Because in the long run, how big your army is or how big your economy is, that's actually secondary. The real measure of a civilization's strength, the one question history really truly cares about, is incredibly simple. Do your own people trust you?